Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video, after major economies attack the self-defeating stupidity of Trump's latest tariffs on the global car industry, including the American car industry, I'd like to discuss how it's likely to affect the major players, why the UK, pretty much alone of the major economies, is not promising retaliatory tariffs, at least just yet. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So we're all going to need to be experts at trade wars now. That's nice. Over the next week, Trump is going to kick off his global trade war in earnest. His opening salvo is a 25% tariff on all car and car parts imports into America. Which doesn't make sense, at least not as an opening gambit. Trump's justification for the tariffs was that if Americans were going to buy non-American cars, they should pay a premium for that. The rationale here is that you make American cars cheaper by comparison. You're not actually making them cheaper, just cheaper by comparison to encourage more sales of American cars, to grow more jobs in America, the usual thing. But by applying the tariffs to car parts as well, Trump is making the American cars more expensive as well. In fact, there is a hypothetical case in which these tariffs could make the American cars more expensive than the foreign imports, at least from Europe or Asia. That's because the American cars are made using components produced in a North America-wide supply chain, includes Canada and Mexico. Individual parts may need work at half a dozen factories, resulting in crossing that border between the United States and either Mexico and Canada or both multiple times, with the tariff applying every time it comes back to the United States. That could mean the 25% tariffs being applied to individual components lots of times, adding up to a very expensive American car, whereas the European or Asian cars get the one-time 25% tariff. So all this does is make cars in America, whether they are imported or domestic, just much more expensive, pricing a lot of Americans out of the market altogether, especially as this trade war more broadly is going to make them poorer. You know, governments of major economies all over the world have been attacking the movers, not just breaking trade agreements, as Canada has pointed out, or World Trade Organization rules, as China's been saying, but it hurts America as well. I think governments could probably understand if Trump was breaking deals, but in a way that was genuinely an America first approach. You know, after all, governments should act in the interests of their country first and foremost. But this inflicts pain on everyone, except maybe Russia. I suppose Putin will be pleased enough, I guess. At the start of 2025, the Russian economy was set for, well, potential failure, and all other major economies were set for growth. Now, because of one powerful moron who has no checks against his moronic behaviour, it's all been blown into reverse. Canada, France and Germany have said there will be retaliatory tariffs. Japan and China are considering their next steps. They've said there may be. Italy and the UK have not, of the rest of the G7 countries. Both countries will suffer from these tariffs, never mind what's coming next. But Italy's attempt to downplay things, Meloni's describing America as first ally, I think is ideological. She's pretty much said as much. The reason the UK government, while not ruling out retaliatory tariffs, is basically not threatening to impose them as yet at any rate, is because there's no point. It would be self-defeating. It's important to understand the impacts of both actions and reactions in a trade war. Trump has applied tariffs to cars and car parts. The impact on America is that costs will increase. The cost of cars will just go up. So there will be fewer sales of them. Inflation will rise, jobs will be lost. For the exporting market, exports will be lost. Now, if you can't replace them with increased sales anywhere else, and given that this is a global tariff, then actually that's probably not the case. Then, yeah, okay, that could result in job losses as well. Now, there are some high-end cars produced in the UK which exports to America, which may be fine. It has been noted that luxury UK cars are the most reliant on exports to America, so you would think the hardest hit. However, their customers are rich, and so they'll probably just pay the extra. But for ordinary cars, you may be talking about job losses, but it will not stoke inflation in this country. But it's still bad. You'd want to reduce the impact. Now, I've already discussed this in a previous video. There's people predictably complaining about the prospect of the government maybe dropping the digital sales tax to get a better deal from Trump. Now, like I've said before, obviously it doesn't sit right to be giving American tech billionaires another tax break while cutting from some of the very vulnerable people in this country. But the alternative is taking an even bigger hit. Not just to the Treasury. It's all right, oh, just replace it with taxes to the rich, No, it's not the hit to the Treasury that's the big deal, although that is a big deal. Jobs are lost. If exports go down significantly, jobs are lost. We drop the digital sales tax, which doesn't raise very much anyway. It's a token tax, which Boris Johnson introduced. No jobs are lost if we drop that tax, none at all. If we stand firm and take the full force of Trump's tariffs, jobs are lost. Public spending is squeezed further. Don't know about you, but we already are losing enough jobs, I think, with a combination of Labour's reforms and the Trump tariffs that we can't avoid because we are definitely copping for some. Don't really see why it makes sense to support even more job losses. Then, when we've taken stock of the damage the tariffs are causing, if the exporting market imposes retaliatory tariffs, as Canada and the EU are talking about, they then increase the cost of goods domestically. So they do now cause inflation domestically, leading to the same fewer sales. So there will be some job losses as a result. And of course, higher inflation. You also risk an escalation of more and higher tariffs from the aggressor. So retaliatory tariffs only compound your problems unless you can use them to get the original tariffs cancelled and it's all square again. So Canada and the EU are planning on imposing these retaliatory tariffs because they can hurt key businesses who may be able to put pressure on Trump. Like Trump is behaving like an absolute monarch, but an absolute monarch doesn't mean a lone ruler. Even kings and autocrats need their barons or oligarchs for support. Hurt them and you may change Trump's mind. And Canada and the EU account for enough trade and investment in the USA to be able to hurt either Trump directly or those supporting him. So it is possible that they can get Trump to back down, and so the extra harm they're going to cause themselves may be worth it in the long term. UK can't. So if we apply retaliatory tariffs, it will only be to look tough, but we'll actually just be punching ourselves in the face. The best thing we can do is, as Mark Carney suggested for Canada, seek reliable trading partners. We already know that Labour were thinking in these terms the second Trump won the election last November. As I've mentioned a few times before, we instantly dropped some of our more vocal criticisms of China and made immediate moves to get closer. So even back to last November, when many Republicans were somehow still thinking that Trump would actually be a calmer president, seeking to win the Nobel Peace Prize to rival Obama, Labour seemed to give the impression they knew what was coming. Where they may have made a mistake is not misjudging the direction of travel, but how quickly they had to move out of the way. We'll need to wait for another week at least before we know the extent of the economic hit the UK is likely to take. And even that'll be an estimate because Trump is chaotic enough to keep changing the terms at a moment's notice. Also, it may take time before we really know the full effects because although a global trade war is always net bad for everyone involved because it just sucks consumer spending power, there are still individual opportunities which can help mitigate. For example, if China imposes politically sensitive retaliatory tariffs on, say, American whiskey produced in Republican states, then Scottish whiskey producers may be able to sell more to China. Trade wars suck money out of the market's effectors, as I say, so sales will always be down net, but there can still be little wins which reduce the overall impact for the countries which are acting together against the aggressor. Carney is saying that Canada needs reliable trading partners. His first ports of call will be the UK and the EU to strengthen trade ties. Again, if the victims of Trump's trade war band together, it doesn't mean you can compensate entirely, but you can mitigate some of the damage, which could further compound the losses for America because as well as retaliatory tariffs, you may get, as we've seen in Canada and regarding Tesla in some parts of Europe, consumers choosing to boycott at least some targeted American products, regardless of the action their government takes. Where the UK does have one potential ace card, though not necessarily an easy one to play, is that because we applied economic sanctions to ourselves with Brexit, we have the potential to actually completely mitigate the damage of Trump's tariffs. It will, however, require being able to hang on for another year or so because those talks with the EU are not scheduled for until 2026. But I'll talk more about that, I think, over the coming week as we start to find out more of Trump's grand plans, basically. So I think this is probably going to be the theme over the next week. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.